Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship podcast. I am Chip Brown of Horns247.com, joined as always by our managing editor at Horns247, Taylor Estes. Taylor, how's it going?
I'm doing well, Chip. How are you doing?
I mean, we're always talking football, so that's flipping fantastic. But Texas baseball. Holy cardiac arrest, Batman.
Yeah.
The Longhorns, they survive a near-death experience at East Carolina, and they are moving on to Omaha for a record 38th time. And we will get into that, Taylor. You're from a baseball family. Your dad was a member of the Miracle Mets in 1969. He was the only, he and Nolan Ryan were the only rookies on that team. You have an older brother who was a first-round draft pick of the Detroit Tigers in 1994. You've been to Omaha, so you can especially appreciate what the Longhorns did in this Super Regional against East Carolina. And it was interesting, Taylor, because the committee could have flipped a coin as to who was the 8 seed and who was the 9 seed in the postseason, but they gave the 8 seed to East Carolina, which meant they got to host. And you're thinking, okay, they call it the jungle there. But the last thing you expected was for Pete Hansen, the first team All Big 12 pitcher and stud for the Texas Longhorns, to go in there and struggle, and he did. I mean, gave up 6 runs in 4 innings, 5 of those earned, and Texas gets beat in game 1, and you're going, uh-oh. And then they are down to the nubs, down 7-2 in game 2, and it took heroics from Doug Hodo, home runs from Doug Hodo, Skylar Messinger, Dylan Campbell to even the score at 7-all. And then Texas goes up 8-7, but gives up a run in the 8th inning. And so they have to score in the 9th inning to win it 9-8. And Dylan Campbell with the walk-off RBI single to get it done. And then Tristan Stevens, what a story to come back and perform well in a starting role in the critical game 3 of that Super Regional after losing his starting position a month ago. Kind of a fairy tale story for the Longhorns, not really expecting to didn't really expect them, to need a fairy tale story to get out of that Super Regional. But sometimes, Taylor, you can come out of those situations thinking, kind of like the UT softball team, they're zombies. They don't believe they can die.
Right. Yeah. And that's a scary team right there. If you had that much, faith and like your ability and your ability to come back from that, because that was shocking. I mean, it seemed in that game 1, Chip, it was like the closer Texas got to it, it was like everything fell apart then. And that it was definitely a shocking ending for sure. I mean, that 8th inning when Texas cut it to a 1-run lead and then, gives up 5 runs in the bottom of the 8th inning, that was, the ball bouncing out of the glove over the center field fence really was a bad omen for what was about to happen for Texas, because that really kind of started getting things rolling more so in East Carolina's favor to shut it down. And, coming out of that game, I was thinking, oh, Texas isn't going to go to Omaha this year. And I was very surprised to even think that way, especially, knowing that they were going to have at least 3 games. And as we mentioned, Tristan Stevens being the guy that they relied on, he hadn't had a start since April 30th. And for him to really come through, all things considered, I mean, you have to consider this, Chip. Like, obviously, there was that 5-hour rain delay that they went through, but he'd already gotten warmed up before they started playing the game. So he was already warmed up at that point. And then, Texas was the away team in that game 3, but that to me, I was just like, this is not good for Texas at all. That they're relying on, Tristan Stevens as a starter. He's probably warmed up already, ready to go, then has to sit there for 5 hours waiting. And with baseball, it's such a mental game that you don't want to put your pitchers, especially, I think, in that type of scenario if you can avoid it at all costs. Obviously, this was unavoidable for Texas. So for him to really come through in that game 3 chip was so clutch. And I think it's one of those where I think Texas fans probably are like, that's the Tristan Stevens we were expecting to see this season. And I'll say one thing that I think with him, I think that just showed really his pride, I think, in playing for the University of Texas, because obviously he's not really like a draft candidate. I mean, maybe later rounds, type of draft if he wants to go and basically get a plane ticket to go play in the minor leagues, but he's not, a top round guy. And so him really coming through in the clutch just to me showed a lot of pride in, his how he feels about this team. And then obviously, the outcome showed that this could be a scary team that you don't want to face in Omaha. I mean, if Texas can really bounce or use that the last 2 games of that series as momentum going into Omaha into a difficult bracket, facing Notre Dame first off, that could be really, really crucial in how the trip to Omaha plays out for Texas.
Yeah, and you mentioned Texas giving up those 5 runs after cutting East Carolina's lead to 1, and they give up those 5 runs in the 8th inning, and it was Tristan Stevens who gave up those runs.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
he lasted a third of an inning, gave up 4 runs on 3 hits, and so for him to come back in that absolutely critical starting role in Game 3 and deliver the goods. Kudos to David Pierce and Sean Allen for believing in Tristan Stevens and putting him in that position to get it done. And kudos to Tristan Stevens for, as you said, waiting out the rain delay and coming out and getting it done. I mean, they thought he would go maybe 4 or 5 innings. He went 6 innings. He was fantastic. Texas obviously got off to a great start thanks to Ivan Melendez, who gets a 3-run bomb in the first inning and breaks Chris Bryant's BB Core home run record of 31 since they have deadened the bats in college baseball in 2011. No one had hit more than 31 home runs in a season. It was Chris Bryant at San Diego. Now it's Ivan Melendez at Texas. And so they get off to a great start, and Tristan Stevens is able to pitch comfortably with a nice cushion. But I'll tell you what, the thing that scares you is what happened to Pete Hansen.
Right.
He's the guy who's just been ice water in his veins. His control's been so fantastic. He's not going to kill you with velocity. He's going to kill you with location and his ability to make pitches look the same. And he just got, he got run. It was a rough outing. Now I expect him to come back and pitch the best game of his life against Notre Dame in Game 1 of the Longhorns' appearance in Omaha, but they need it because Notre Dame, Taylor, this Notre Dame team had their 9 position players. 8 of them are seniors. 4 of those are 5th-year seniors, and the other position player is a junior. I mean, this is a Notre Dame team that, rallies around each other. They're not phased. They field really well. They're a good hitting team at 294, but they steal bases, they run. And like Texas, they have a lefty starter who they rely on, but their bullpen is the strength of their pitching, whereas Texas's starting pitching is its strength. And you kind of hold on for dear life when Texas goes to the bullpen. Notre Dame has a freshman lefty closer named Jack Finlay, who is just killing it. He shut down number 1 Tennessee over the final 5 innings of their Game 3, and the kid shut down Tennessee in the final 2 innings of their Game 1 win. So, and he's got a sub-1 ERA. I mean, this kid is, man, he just brings a presence to the mound. It's amazing. He's a freshman. Texas is going to have to put some runs on the board and keep this kid from being able to come in a save situation, because he looks pretty fearless to me, Taylor.
Yeah, and that's, it's going to be interesting to really watch Chip, because if you think about it, excuse me, with Texas, I mean, the strength is their hitting right now. I mean, as a team, Texas is batting 318, and then obviously you have Murphy Staley and Ivan Melendez that are just raking this season, obviously, but it's not even just them. I mean, Dylan Campbell came up big, Trey Faltini, he is, I think he's at 15 home runs now. I mean, there's a number of guys, that really can get the job done from the plate, really, and they're going to really need to rely on that. You're right, because when Texas has to rely on its bullpen, it makes you a little nervous and like anxious, honestly, watching it. Even like they could have a really cushioned lead, and it still doesn't make you feel all warm and fuzzy if you know that they do have to go to their bullpen. So yeah, I mean, this is going to be a really tough challenge. I think the side of the bracket that Texas is in with, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, and Notre Dame, that's a pretty big gauntlet. And you definitely don't want to fall into the losers bracket, no doubt about that, because there are so few games or days off if you do lose, especially game one. I mean, that's like the worst game that you could possibly lose. So Texas really needs to come at it hard, and you hope that Pete Hansen can get back to the Pete Hansen of the regular season, because they're going to need him for sure in this first game, and you're going to probably want him to go as long as he possibly can to make it to where Texas doesn't have to rely on that bullpen that kind of gives you heartburn when you think about them coming into the game.
Yeah, I mean, Jack, and just to reiterate, Jack Finley, in 4 postseason appearances, he's given up 1 run on 3 hits with 4 walks and 12 strikeouts in 10.1 innings pitched. So,
That good? Like,
I
my
mean,
goodness.
sub-1 ERA in the postseason, 1.99 ERA for the season. So, I mean, this kid is, you don't want to see him coming. He reminds me of Houston Street,
Yeah.
back in 2002. When Houston Street came into the game, it was turn out the lights, ball game's over. And this kid, Jack Finley, has that kind of presence for Notre Dame. So, look, their starting pitching is gettable. You can get to their pitchers, and they're not. Their coach is not afraid to sort of platoon a bunch of guys until he can get to Finley. So you've got to get to Notre Dame's starting pitching, put runs on the board, and keep them from getting into a save situation. But taking down Tennessee, Texas had beaten Tennessee earlier in the year, but Tennessee was the most the most offensive team, even more than Texas, going into the super regional round, and now they're gone. And you mentioned A&M and Oklahoma. I mean, you got to give it up to Jim Schlossnagle at A&M. A&M did nothing last year, and now they're a feared team. They beat Texas in Austin earlier this year. They don't, they just do everything well. They're just a really well-coached team. They play with confidence. And then Oklahoma, when Texas last saw Oklahoma, it was an 8-1 Oklahoma win in the championship game of the Big 12 tournament. So, and Oklahoma wasn't supposed to be, doing this either. It was really, TCU, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech. And so, Texas has the revenge factor against both A&M and OU. But as we all know at the College World Series, it's how is your pitching?
Mm-hmm.
Are you able to keep your pitching lined up and not, go through a bunch of arms in getting wins? So it's going to be fascinating. Vegas has Texas as they were an early favorite because they went to the championship series in Omaha last year. They know what it takes. They lost to Mississippi State in a gut wrencher, and they've got a great hitting baseball team. And when Pete Hansen's on and Lucas Gordon's on, and Tristan Stevens has been coming out of the bullpen. It's going to be really interesting to see how David Pierce handles that pitching rotation, hopefully over a long run in Omaha.
Yeah, yeah, because I mean, I love the College World Series in general. Like, it's one of those sporting events that I'll tell anybody, if you don't even like college baseball or don't even like baseball, but you have an opportunity to go to it, you go. Like, it's such a cool experience. I was able to go in 2004. I know some Texas fans may not want to hear about that experience because it was when they did lose to Cal State Fullerton, but at the time I was dating a guy that played on the Cal State Fullerton team, so I got to experience. It was at Rosenblatt, so it was more of the historical type of park that was kind of a dump, but it was so cool just to be in Rosenblatt, stadium there. And I haven't been since what's the new stadium called?
TD Ameritrade.
That's right. Yeah. So I haven't been since then, but still, I just feel like it's just such a special, unique type of event. And it's really fun when you stay the whole time. I'll say that. And so, if there are Texas fans going, it is really cool to make it to that championship series if you've never been to it. But you hope that that's what Texas can do. And I think that this team there's no, like, the way that I look at this team, Chip, is kind of like, if they are on, there's no reason that Texas shouldn't make it to the, College World Series finals, the championship series. Excuse me, I guess, So they're that good when they're on. It's just when there are the questions, you just never know what's going to happen. And I feel like with this year's team, Chip, I was talking to my dad actually about it. I feel like what you're seeing from Ivan Melendez is obviously something historical because he broke, Chris Bryant's record, as you mentioned, hitting his 32nd home run. You hope that this team does it for him, like
Right.
to see him keep going. He's a Golden Spikes Award finalist, and he deserves with what he is doing, not just only as a home run hitter. He's just been so lethal from the plate in general. I mean, whether he's hitting home runs or base hits or whatever it is. I mean, he's not just a one trick pony or like a home run or bust type of guy. And he's having such a special season. You hope that this team can really rally around him, especially. And real quick on that. So I got a message from an ECU fan that's a member over at 24/7 Sports at the ECU site. And he sent me this DM, and I'm going to read this to you. It's about Ivan Melendez. So he said, I was in the jungle when the Hispanic Titanic hit his first home run. It not only went over the fence, cleared the tall trees, past the parking lot behind the trees, but bounced on the other side of a 4-lane road. I've never seen a ball hit so far. And I read that. I was just like, dang, that is pretty crazy. But I mean, he's just such a special guy that he's not going to be back next year. I mean, he's already, I believe, a redshirt junior. So this is, his last hoorah, I guess, at Texas. And you really hope that this team can really come together and let him show all of college baseball how special and, electric of a player that he has been for the Longhorns.
Yeah, and that 3-run home run in the first inning against East Carolina in Game 3 should have cemented him as the winner of every National Player of the Year award. Collegiate baseball's already given it to him. He deserves the Hauser Trophy and the Golden Spikes Award because of the historic season he's had at the plate. He made his second fielding error of the season at first base over the weekend, but he's been great at fielding in his position. And remember, that's a big part of the reason he came back.
Right,
Because
right?
He was a DH last year with Zach Zubia at first base, and he wanted to show scouts, I can field a position. I'm a position player, not just a bat, even though the DH is now, universal in pro baseball. But and kudos to Ivan Melendez for doing that
Right.
and getting what he wanted, and now hopefully getting what is unfinished business from last year, and that that gut wrencher, that 4-3 loss to Mississippi State with the national championship on the line. So I think I think you're right, Taylor. I mean, I think this team is rallying around each other, and the fact that they took that punch with Pete Hansen struggling and Tristan Stevens struggling in Game 1. That was your 1 and 2 starter going into the year. and answered. I
Mhm.
mean, when you least expected it, down 7-2, people were turning off TVs left and right, and boom, boom, boom. Those big home runs get them back in the game, and they find a way. So uh, this is one of those situations, I think, where they can all look each other in the eye and almost say, we shouldn't be here. So let's take extreme advantage of this opportunity. And we'll see. They're a fun team to watch. I'll say that.
Yes, they definitely are.
All right. Well, let's get to football
Yes.
because it is football season year round here on the Flagship podcast, and we are starting a summer series. This week, we are ranking Texas's position groups from 10 to 1. Okay, so today it's gonna be a little tough. Today, we're asking Texas football to look itself in the mirror, make that change, and do better, Taylor, because I don't think this is going to surprise anyone. At number 10 in our position rankings, the offensive line.
Yeah. Shouldn't
And
surprise. If you listen to the Flagship podcast, it shouldn't surprise anybody that this is number 10.
and it is I did a little research for this,
Okay.
like going to Pro Football Focus. I don't know, people may want to sit down for this because well, let's give some love to Derek Kerstetter because he actually was the highest rated offensive lineman on the team last year, and he was the 17th rated pass blocking tackle in college football last year. And so, give him credit for that.
Right.
But and he was a decent run blocker, but he's gone. He's
Right.
gone.
Yeah.
So your
He's
best
not in the
offensive
mix
lineman
anymore.
is gone. The other two tackles, Taylor, Andre Carrick and Christian Jones, and I said him in that order, were not among the top 998 offensive linemen in college football last year in pass blocking. They got sub 50 grades, and yes, it's that scale. You want to try and make 100. They were below 45, and these are the returning starters with experience,
Right.
who you're counting on to protect Quinn Ewers or Hudson Card and allow the quarterback to find all these suddenly stacked receivers,
Mhm.
and that's horrifying.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, if you're a Texas fan, that's the worst thing that you could hear. I mean, you get all these good skill players. You have arguably, I'm not even going to say arguably. You have, in my opinion, the best running back room in college football. I don't even want to say arguably because I think that Texas has the number one running back room, and yet you have a big roadblock in front of all of it. All of it. I
Yeah,
mean, yeah.
it's I was surprised. I thought it was at least better than 44.8% in terms of a pass blocking grade for Andre Carrick. And Christian Jones, we know, has struggled, and they moved him to the right side, which felt a little bit like, okay, this is your last chance
Right.
before the big boys come in. The top rated offensive line recruiting class in
The big
2020.
boys as in 18-year-olds we're
Yeah,
talking
big boys as an 18-year-old
Yeah.
who probably still eat every meal at McDonald's, but they're
It's dinner table.
you got to hope they came in ready to work, because to say there's opportunity is an understatement. And remember, this is a offensive line room that has thinned out. Isaiah Hookfin, we reported weeks and weeks ago, is going to end up on a medical scholarship because of that motorcycle accident he was in last December. And so you don't have a lot of experienced options. Jalen Garth hardly has any experience, but someone has got to step up at that tackle position, because the Pro Football Focus grades are pretty good for Junior Angalau as a run blocker, pretty good for Jake Majors as a run blocker. Both need to step it up in their pass blocking, but they're well above where Andre Carrick and Christian Jones were graded. The point is, there's no one who is absolutely proven themselves outside of Junior Angalau as a run blocker to hold down a starting position. I mean, and that's not what you want to hear. I mean, our man Dan Neal, who two-time All-American at the University of Texas, two-time Super Bowl winner with the Denver Broncos, says, and hopefully everybody listens to the Flagship podcast that came out Monday. He said, you don't want a freshman playing on the offensive line. Their body's not ready. Their mind isn't ready. Maybe there's that unicorn here and there, but remember, the Brockermeyer twins at Alabama redshirted last year.
Right.
So, and they were 5 stars. And so this is where we are, Taylor, and this is why the offensive line is number 10 out of 10 in our position rankings.
Yeah, and I was going to say, Chip, too, when you were saying that you hope that some of these recruits that are coming, or that are now, I guess, on campus, but the summer enrollees, are ready to go. When we say that, we're not saying that because that's an ideal situation. We're saying it because that's how dire the situation is. Because I have seen a few times in some of the comments on the YouTube video when we've talked about the offensive line, some of the YouTube comments have been about, you don't want the offensive linemen the freshmen to have to be relied upon. And we agree, like 100%. The thing is that that's not the situation that Texas is in right now. And that's an alarming situation to be in, because as you mentioned, we had Dan Neal on for the interview podcast. Excuse me. I have something in my throat. I keep choking over it. But for the interview podcast on Monday, and he said exactly that. I mean, this is a guy who was an All-American, as Chip mentioned, a 2-time Super Bowl winner with the Denver Broncos. So somebody who obviously knows offensive line play. And, he said himself, that's not an ideal situation that you want to be in. I had sources during spring practice tell me that the offensive line was so bad that there's going to be probably at least 2 true freshmen starting on it. And they didn't believe that those 2 true freshmen were even on campus yet. None of this is us supporting the fact that, Texas is going to be in a position to potentially have to rely on one, if not multiple, true freshman offensive linemen. That's just the truth to the situation. And this is a tricky situation that Kyle Flood's going to navigate. I've said it time and again too. I don't think any coach in the country would want to be in his shoes to have to be in a position to potentially rely on multiple true freshmen. He didn't really have to do that at Alabama, and this is not an ideal situation for any coach. It's not one that any coach would want, but it's unfortunately that's the situation that Texas is in because of the poor recruiting at the position in the years prior to when Steve Sarkisian and his staff got on campus. And so, I think that when you look at the grading that you had said with Andre Carrick and Christian Jones and how poor it was, I think if you're a Texas fan, you pray to God that those guys, a light bulb turns on for them so that they don't have to rely on true freshman offensive linemen. And that's the best case scenario. And it's just really hard to see that best case scenario playing out, Chip, when you look at the actual facts and the stats that really matter and how, they're not even in the top 998. Is that what you said, 998? Yeah, that is unacceptable, you would think, for a position group at the University of Texas, but that's the reality of the situation. So, it's unfortunate.
Like Texas State had three offensive tackles ranked higher, a lot higher. Like they were in the top 200. Texas, 2 of the tackles they relied upon didn't make the top 998 in pass blocking. That's confounding. And people have said, well, why didn't Texas go in the portal to get offensive linemen? They did whatever they could to get Devin Campbell and Kelvin Banks to come, and the promise was early playing time.
Yeah.
So you'd rather develop high school talent and have that for 3 years than a quick fix. And I get it, but we have Xavier Worthy and Jordan Whittington and Isaiah Nair and a Jay Hall and Tariq Milton. Listen, Kyle Flood's going to earn every penny
Yeah.
of that contract. So Steve Sarkisian, because they're going to have to call plays and possibly redesign things the way that Texas did with Colt McCoy and Jordan Shipley in 2009, where you're rolling the pocket a bunch. It's not ideal, but whatever it takes, you've got to find ways to keep that quarterback protected when basically you had two revolving doors. Well, again, kudos to Derek Kerstetter.
Yes.
You had one revolving door on the other side, and that cannot happen if Texas wants to improve on 2021.
Mm-hmm.
So let's Taylor, let's move enough of this. Everybody knows what's going on with the offensive line.
So second worst. Just kidding.
So the second worst, and there's good news here, people. Number 9 in our 10 position rankings as part of our summer series will be rolling out each week over the next several weeks is special teams. Now, there's a reason that special teams, which performed really well last year, is number 9. And it's pretty much because Dicker the kicker turned Dicker the first team All Big 12 punter is gone. And he handled kickoffs, field goals, punts, and he did it unbelievably for 4 years at Texas. And look, you're a Longhorn fan. You haven't had to worry about who's kicking field goals for the last 4 years. Not since Dicker kicked that 40-yarder with 9 seconds left against Oklahoma in 2018. And you're like, oh my God, that kid's a freshman? Okay, he can handle it. He can handle the moment. And so with no Dicker the kicker and no sure answer right now, this is to be determined who's going to be kicking field goals. And, with Dicker having averaged 46.7 yards per punt last year, first team All Big 12, those services being gone, special teams is number 9, Taylor, because of those unknowns.
Yeah, and the unknown, because if you look at it, I mean, I wasn't at the spring game. Did they kick any field goals? I mean, that's the thing. Like, they didn't even have Will Stone on campus, and so yeah, there's such.
They did kick some field goals, but it was not pretty.
Not memorable. Yeah, things that you want to erase, like take bleach to your brain and make sure that you never see that spot again. But yeah, I mean, it's a huge unknown, and you're right. I mean, Texas fans have been kind of I guess spoiled a little bit, I guess you could say, with special teams being what they've been, because they've been so good. I mean, Texas had its first ever Ray Guy Award winner just a few years ago. I mean, that first ever in program history, and then follow it up with I guess Ryan Bushevsky was on and off his first years, but really before he got injured in 2019, he was doing really well. And then Cameron Dicker comes over and takes over Ryan Bushevsky's starting role at punter. So yeah, I mean, this has been a group that Texas fans have really just kind of didn't have to breathe or, worry about their breathing when they took the field, because it had done its job for so long and done its job efficiently for so long. And so the unknown definitely is alarming. I've personally never seen Will Stone kick in a game, so it's hard for me to really judge what he is going to be bringing to Texas. It's also different in high school too. And, I think that, there's a big old question mark, and you're right. That's why it's the number 9 group. And who knows, we may look back on this chip at the end of the season and be like, that should have never been the number 9 group. But there's just so much unknown, so much change in personnel in general, at both kicking and punting, that, you just don't know what to expect at this point. And it's hard to have anything higher than mediocre at best expectations.
Yeah, because what Texas has had, as you just mentioned, has been so far above the average that we forget that when things are tough at those positions, kicking field goals, punting, man, it can change the outlook of your entire team because it's so much about having the ability to deliver those field goals when you have to have them and change field position with your punting game. Now, if you're a loyal listener, loyal follower, loyal watcher of the Flagship podcast on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel or wherever you listen to your podcast, we had Cameron Dicker on the Flagship podcast right before the NFL draft, and he said that he's impressed with Will Stone, that he helped recruit Stone to Texas, and he feels like everything will be okay. He also was roommates with Isaac Pearson, who is the likely successor as the punter. And Pearson, from what I'm hearing, is doing well. That he can't say anything until you see him do it with the lights on consistently. It's one thing to do it in practice. It's another to get it done in a game. But Dicker feels good about Isaac Pearson. The sources I've talked to feel good about Isaac Pearson as the punter. Now, here's some more good news. Two of the players who blocked kicks last year, DeMarvion Overshawn and Keelan Robinson, are back. Marcus Washington has moved on, but they did block 3 kicks last year. And Deshaun Jameson is back as a fifth-year senior, and he has 3 returns for touchdowns. Now, none of them were last year, and they need to get that spark back in the return game. But that's some much-needed proven experience in the return game. Plus, you've got Xavier Worthy and a host of other Blazers now, Brennan Thompson and his 10-2 speed or in the 100. So there is a lot of positives, even though the unknowns put special teams down here. There are some positives in the return game, in the blocking game, and oh, by the way, Jeff Banks is the special teams coordinator, and he may be the best special teams coordinator in the country. So, like you said, Taylor, we may look back at putting special teams number 9. We probably will, and say, "Oh man, were we ever wrong?" And
Yeah.
you'd be happy to say that. And we just gave you some really concrete evidence as to why we might be wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right about, the other areas of special teams, especially the return game and the speed there. I mean, speed is so crucial in special teams, not just as returners, but also,
The gunners
you know,
getting down the field.
yeah, I mean, look, if you go back to Michael Dixon's true freshman Michael Dixon's Ray Guy Award season, that was 2017 when Josh Thompson was a true freshman, and his speed was really crucial and downing a lot of those punts that Michael Dixon had inside the 20 and inside the 10 and 5-yard lines sometimes. And so that's where having that speed in special teams is big, and that's, you hope a guy like a Brennan Thompson who as you mentioned, won the 100-meter, and the speed that he brings from like a track speed standpoint, that he'll get on the field early in special teams. And that's what you kind of want from true freshmen that maybe not be starters at their position. You want the Brennan Thompsons to really, hone in on special teams. And that's where I think Jeff Banks is such a great special teams coach, because people listen to him. The guys listen to him. And so they want to get on the field and play for Jeff Banks. He's a really fiery type of coach. If you ever watch him out at practice, he's the one that's like screaming in the guys' faces and stuff. And people respect him, really do respect him as you mentioned, one of the best special teams coordinators in the country. So if there's any guy that can do the job, it's him. And you just really do hope that some of that speed really shows up, because you may need it if there's a bad punt. I mean, that's the reality. You may need those guys to down the ball so that people can't get even better field position if there is a missed punt or something like that. But it's going to be interesting to see how Isaac Pearson does kind of take over the punting role. Another pro kick Australia guy, Texas has had back to back now with Michael Dixon and Ryan Bushevsky, and now him. So now is his time to shine, and you hope that Cameron Dicker's assessment of both him and Will Stone is accurate, and it could be. And as you said, and I said, like, we could look back on this and been kicking ourselves for ranking it number 9.
Yeah, and don't forget that Texas lost Justin Motter, the long snapper, who also was clockwork. You never worried about him. And so now they're going to, rely on, and if I had my glasses, I would be
Well, they
better off.
signed oh man, sorry guy, I'm forgetting his name. They signed a deep snapper.
Oh, yeah, Lance St. Louis.
Yeah, Lance St. Louis. How did I forget that name?
But yeah, so I mean they've got a decent situation. Oh my gosh, this is embarrassing. This is what my son makes fun of me about now all the time.
What are you looking for right now? I'll look on I have it on the roster right now.
Oh my gosh, I'm looking Zach Edwards, for God's sake.
Okay.
He's your long snapper, and I think they feel good about him replacing Justin Motter. But again, Jeff Banks. Look, Texas is lucky to have Jeff Banks. If not for a Halloween party, he might be the head coach at Washington State. I'm not kidding. I mean, remember their head coach stepped down because he wouldn't get vaccinated. Jeff Banks was the punter on the Washington State team that went to the Rose Bowl and played Michigan in '97 with Ryan Leaf at quarterback. And Jeff Banks is a high energy, incredible recruiter. David Beatty, the former Kansas coach who was at Texas A&M with Jeff Banks under Kevin Sumlin, said that all the other coaches would go listen to Banks' meetings on special teams because he was that good.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when coaches talk about other coaches like that, it tells you. And, when I was talking to Gary Patterson for the Insider a couple of weeks ago, he mentioned Jeff Banks and how impressed he is with his, special teams teachability, his ability to communicate the importance of special teams, but also the execution, the technical execution of special teams. And it did show on the field for Texas last season. So very good reason, Taylor, to believe that special teams will finish higher than number 9 in our position rankings after the season.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I thought when Steve Sarkisian was putting together his coaching staff, him getting Jeff Banks was huge because we do know a former Texas coach tried to hire Jeff Banks, and Jeff Banks essentially said, thanks, but no thanks. So, but he did believe in Steve Sarkisian, and that was a huge get. I mean, I personally I think him and Bo Davis were probably two of the biggest pickups, from the assistant coaching staff that Steve Sarkisian was able to hire here.
Yeah, and he's he's $1 million guy, but he's worth it. And he was the guy that Nick Saban was the most upset about. Like,
yes, yeah.
Saban knew Sarkisian was going to go, probably going to take Kyle Flood with him, since Flood came with him from the Atlanta Falcons. But he did not expect Jeff Banks to leave Alabama. So that'll be another thing that I'm sure Nick Saban will use as fuel when the Crimson Tide roll into Austin for that showdown at 11 a.m. on September 10th.
Hey, at least Nick Saban didn't call out Steve Sarkisian for buying his roster. So there still may be some respect there, at least. That's good.
Yeah. All right, there you have it. The first 2 installments of our summer series, counting down the position rankings for the Texas Longhorns. Next week, we will get to number 8 and number 7. All right, Taylor, you ready for some Love It or Leave It?
I am. Before we get to Love It or Leave It, we're going to take a really short break, but stick around because we have more football and baseball talk coming up in Love It or Leave It. So stay tuned. We will be right back. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will roll on here. Chip, you ready for some Love It or Leave It here?
Oh, yeah.
All righty, let me get this pulled up here. My first love it or leave it for you is love it or leave it. You can safely state who the Longhorns' best offensive tackle is right now.
Oh my gosh, I'm leaving this. I have no clue. When Andre Carrick went down with a ankle injury toward the end of spring ball, they had Hayden Connor, the behemoth offensive guard, out at left tackle, and they feel like he represents everything that they're looking for in an offensive lineman. Tough, accountable, does the right things. Maybe not the most, athletic or have the best footwork. He's, they call the offensive lineman with super quick feet and great balance, dancing bears. I don't think anyone's going to say that about Hayden Connor. But look, Dan Neal says in the Flagship podcast interview on Monday, give me a guy with okay talent and great character who's coachable and puts the team first, and I'll show you a winner. Mm-hmm. So that's what it's going to take. And Taylor, if they have to play two true freshmen on that offensive line to get a better pass blocking performance than what they had last year from a fifth-year senior last year, Christian Jones. He's a sixth-year senior this year with the COVID redshirt. And that's another thing Dan Neal said. If you haven't shown it to us by now, it ain't coming. So, no, I'm leaving this. I cannot tell you who the best offensive tackle is on the Texas football team right now. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I'm going to leave it because, I mean, as we can regurgitate this all we want, as we say, like the fact that there could be, probably one offensive tackle that's a true freshman starting this season is not ideal. I mean, that's a very poor, situation for a unit to be in. And so the fact that that is the case, and we've never seen, any of these offensive linemen that are true freshmen that could compete for starting playing time, we've never seen them in a college practice, let alone in a college jersey, except for when they took official visits to Texas and, geared up in Texas jerseys. That's the only time we've seen them. So yeah, I'm definitely leaving this. And I had no clue who Texas' best offensive tackle is right now. Sadly, it actually might be a true freshman 5-star that just, enrolled this summer.
And I do think Devin Campbell, Kelvin Banks are special. Mm-hmm. If their attitude is right and they care about winning and they know that they've got a guy like Bijan Robinson behind them who should bring out the absolute best in every offensive lineman, because if you just get in the way of your defender, that Bijan Robinson will probably do the rest and go get you 5, 7, 80 yards. So, look, it may not be the worst thing. It's not ideal, but it may not be the worst thing, because what Texas had last year at one of the offensive tackles was embarrassing. Yeah. All right, Taylor, love it or leave it, number 2.
All right, love it or leave it. You are more concerned about who will be kicking field goals right now than you are about who will be punting.
Yeah, I'm gonna love. I am. Yes, I'm gonna love this. I'm more concerned about who's kicking field goals than I am. I think Isaac Pearson's going to be okay as the punter. He may not average 46.7 yards per punt like Dicker the punter last year, but I think he can handle it. These pro kick guys have been good. I mean, Michael Dixon, for crying out loud. And so, I do have real concerns about the field goal kicking, because what we saw in the spring game from Bert Auburn, to me, was kind of an elimination. Like, you're now eliminated from the island. Like, your torch is out,
Like Survivor or something.
Yeah, I mean, now we didn't really see much of Gabo Lozano, the other walk-on, but look, we're hoping Will Stone has some stones and can handle this job and kick field goals for Texas the way Cameron Dicker did, or at least anywhere close, because Dicker's now the record holder pretty much across the board for points scored by a kicker, replacing Phil Dawson.
Right.
For crying out loud. So yeah, I'm gonna love this, Taylor. How about you?
Yeah, I'm gonna love this too. I think the concern is with field goal kicking, and it's more of a concern because it hasn't been a concern, for Texas, if that makes sense. I feel like it's almost amplified because it really has not been a situation that Texas has been in, which is a very fortunate situation for Texas. But field goal kicking can really make or break games. I mean, it's like you have one job, that whole thing, and it's like if you don't get that job done and you're a field goal kicker, then you literally can be the reason why teams win and lose games. And whether that's fair or not, it's the the outside perception of it more times than not. So yeah, Will, I like how you said Will Stone better have some stones. Remember, his got to be stone cold. We want him to be stone.
Oh yeah, stone cold, stone cold, not half stones.
Yeah, stone cold stones.
Stone cold.
Oh gosh, I don't know why I just said that.
We want him to be stone cold.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Dicker had 3 game-winning field goals, and one of them was against Kansas.
Yeah. Oh god.
Like that ignominy would have hit Texas in the town.
Fired in 2019.
I mean, yeah, that was Les Miles had gone for 2. They were behind. They weren't tied.
Yeah.
He had to make it for Texas to win. So, that's what you're hoping. You're hoping that Will Stone is stone cold.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
All right. Love it or leave it, number 3.
The final is love it or leave it. Texas baseball figured out enough in surviving the Super Regional to make you feel good about the Longhorns' chances of returning to the championship series in Omaha.
I don't feel good, so I'm going to leave it. But I do feel good about the bats, that hitting lineup, and David Pierce gives so much credit to Troy Tulowitzki for coming in and really getting these guys not only at the plate, because Tulo was a great hitter, he was a great fielder, and he's really, Pierce has said, really helped the infield. And I mean, Texas is number 1 in college baseball in fielding percentage. So, wow, what a sort of unsung hero under the radar, Troy Tulowitzki is, because, Skylar Messinger said a big part of the reason he chose Texas was to come and learn from Troy Tulowitzki. And, Trey Faltini's hitting the ball so much better this year, and Murphy Staley, for crying out loud. My point is, you got to jump on Notre Dame fast. You got to put big runs up, and don't let that kid Jack Finley show up. He's like Malachi from Children of the Corn. You don't want to see this kid come in out of that bullpen door, because it probably means you're done. So I do feel good about that, Taylor. Everything else, I mean, Texas even made some uncharacteristic errors in the Super Regional. The pitching was all messed up, and then it was fixed miraculously.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm going to leave this, but I do feel good about the Texas, batting. They have the ability to put up runs and put them up quickly. How about you?
Yeah, I'm kind of torn with this because I would say you would hope, like, I want to give benefit of the doubt to the team, I think, in making me feel good about the Longhorns' chances of returning to a championship series in Omaha because of the way they did claw their way back. But I agree with you, and I have faith at them at the plate too. I mean, the offense is not the concern at all. It's not even just the pitching. It's the depth of the pitching, rotation and the bullpen. How deep that is, or not so deep that is. I think that is such a cause for concern. It makes me really torn, but I want to feel good about it. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like this team is poised to make a run. And I really do. I feel like, when you can really rally and battle back in a situation like they did in the Super Regional, that can give, even if it's false hope, it can still give enough hope that these guys are going to buy in and real and believe that that wasn't just a coincidence. So I'm just gonna love it. I'm gonna love it. I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt. I think that what we saw from Pete Hansen obviously was out of character, and you really, it's hard for me to expect it in back to back games, I would say. So I think I'm gonna give him the benefit of the doubt that he's gonna bounce back, and I really think that this could have been a huge momentum and confidence booster for Tristan Stevens as well, and that's what you hope for. And Lucas Gordon, he gave up some, runs in that game too, but he was doing pretty well before. I think it was like the fourth inning or fifth inning that he kind of got a little bit into a bog down, but they still, rallied back and were able to win that game too. So I think I'm going to love it. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt because I do think that this team is so talented from a hitting standpoint that it's 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 talented enough that it's going to pose a challenge for other people to be able to keep up with them.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to test the theory of I'll take pitching over hitting any day, because if you look back at Mississippi State last year with Landon Sims, he was unhittable when it
Right.
mattered, and Will Bednar. I mean, you had two aces that you could bank on, and normally you have two. Like, you may not have a third starter, but you have two guys that you feel like you can run out there and they'll give you 6 innings. And Texas doesn't have that right now. Heck, they're trying to make sure Pete Hansen's right
Right.
for this Notre Dame game. So if Texas is going to make that run, they are going to have to do it with their bats, and we're going to test the theory of pitching versus hitting for this Longhorns team, unless the pitchers all get right. And look, I I was completely mystified by this pitching staff kind of losing its bearings after Tanner Witt went down with that elbow injury, Tommy John surgery, because Travis Staley and Aaron Nixon, all those guys were pitching pretty well
Right.
before that injury, and then they weren't. And it's been a guessing game. Aaron Nixon's still not right. I mean, Jared Southard is more of the closer for this team than Aaron Nixon. So, but Travis Staley, Andre Duplantier, Jared Southard have been pitching better, and they're going to need to really come through in some obviously critical situations, because if you make a deep run, your pitching gets extended, and you're going to have to hold it together while you hopefully put some runs on the board. So again, this is a fun Texas team to watch. You don't know what's coming next. So I can't wait. I can't wait for Friday to watch this Texas team take on Notre Dame.
Yeah. Six
I mean,
o'clock, I believe, right? 6 o'clock Central.
yep,
Yep.
yep.
Gonna be
It's gonna be
fun for
fun.
sure. Yeah.
So what would you tell people to do in Omaha,
That's a good
like,
question. I mean, so
aside from the baseball?
yeah, I personally didn't do a ton like in the city. Just because like I was with a family of a baseball player. So it was a little bit of a different experience. And like I don't know the proximity of TD Ameritrade to where like Rosenblatt, is it in the same area or no? It's
No,
not,
it's
right.
like
Yeah.
downtown.
So because I know one thing that was really cool when I was there was there was a street across from like the parking lot at Rosenblatt, and there all of the houses were all like houses of teams. So it was like there was a Cal State Fullerton house, there was a Texas house, there was this that like people who own the house like essentially allowed the teams and families and fans of different teams party at their house before you went over to this and just walked across the street over to Rosenblatt. So that was so cool. But I don't think that's the case anymore because this was back in, again, 2004. I was in high school still. So when this happened. So
Yeah,
yeah.
Omaha definitely overthought things on building that new TD Ameritrade Stadium, which doesn't have any of the character of Rosenblatt. I mean,
Yeah.
you develop these traditions over years and years and years. Like you just mentioned, these houses, becoming tailgate centers for each team.
Yeah.
That takes years to establish, and you're kind of out away from everything to where you could have that kind of charm across the street from the ballpark.
Right. Yeah, it
And
was so unique. It was so cool.
yeah,
Like that was so it's kind of hard for me to say because that would have been my favorite thing. to do. There was one, I don't know the name of it. It was so long ago. There's a really good steakhouse that I actually went to.
Misty's.
Maybe it was. It may have been Misty's. Yeah, it was really, really good. A funny story, real quick here, Chip. So, the guy I was dating at the time, I went to the steakhouse with him and his dad, and we were sitting there, and some guy like came over to the table and was like, "Oh, are you here for the College World Series?" And he's like, "Yeah, I play for Fullerton, Cal State Fullerton." And the guy was like, "Oh, that's so cool. I've been, you know, I always love the College World Series, being here, living in Omaha, this type of stuff." So this guy like walks away. We finish our meal, and my then boyfriend's dad asked for the check, and the waiter was like, "Oh, somebody already took care of it." And so, because of that, and because of NCAA rule, he had to actually tell like his team, his coaches and stuff, like, "Hey, some random person picked up our check at dinner." And he almost was not, he was a starter. He was their starting center fielder. He was almost not allowed to start in the final series against Texas because the NCAA had to investigate who bought the dinner. Yeah,
Wow.
it was, and they eventually, had enough evidence to prove that like it wasn't, a gift of any kind. It was just some random person doing a nice gesture. However, it almost caused him not be able to play in the actual
Wow.
championship game. Yeah.
Yeah. Look how far we've come now in the
I
age
know,
of
right? Now you have Lamborghini
NIL.
sponsoring you.
Yeah.
Aston Martin,
You
whatever.
better have people paying you to rep their food. By
Yeah,
God.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay, well, it's going to be fascinating. It's going to be great. And we'll have all of the reaction right here on the Flagship podcast to Texas in the College World Series. And we will continue our summer series ranking the positions of the Texas Longhorns. We started off with number 10 and number 9 this week. 10, the offensive line, 9, special teams. Next week, numbers 8 and number 7. Thanks, everybody, for listening. For Taylor Estes, I'm Chip Brown. We'll see you over at horns247.com. Until next time, stay safe and keep the faith.